Right. So this is my hello everyone. I'm Pratyush, and this is my project mobile wallet, which I was working on under the guidance of Rajan Maurya. So starting to start off, this was the high level overview of my major contribution in this year's GSOC. So one of them being our existing architecture migration from MVP to MVVM. So it now this migration had its own advantages, which I'll be discussing down the line. So moving on, we also migrated our entire project from traditional views that we were using earlier to the new latest Jetpack Compose views. And also we migrated our current single modular app into a multi-modular application. Moreover, once since this migration were taking place, we had to make sure that we essentially clean up and refactor our code along the way, and that's what we did. Moreover, migration of code base from Java to Kotlin was an essential undertaking that was done somewhere between pre-GSOC and in the initial days of GSOC. And finally, migration from retrofit to Kto, which is a network library. So moving on, to start off, this is the first MVP to MVB migration. So this migration was followed under the guidance of Rajan Maurya, keeping in mind that we had proper MVVM structure, we had repositories in place, we had view modelers in place. So this is what we did. So this enabled us to properly test our code base. With earlier in MVP architecture, the views and presenters were tightly coupled, and as such, we weren't able to properly write unit test or UI test for our code base. And also with the view model, with this in MEVM, this coupling was somewhat loose, and this enables us to write proper unit testing and UI testing. Moreover, view model provides us a very good way to preserve our data across orientation changes, such as screen orientation or language changes. So while doing this migration, we ensure that we followed proper solid principles, which any software developer should, and that's what we did. So this brings us the advantage that in future, let's say if any other contributor hops on our project, he will be able to easily navigate through the project and make contributions accordingly. So moving on, migration to Compost was a huge undertaking in this year's GSOC. Since our entire project was using traditional views, and we had to migrate entire thing from Compose, meaning to say our entire code base is now using Kotlin. There's no Java over there. So this Jetpack Compose allowed us to create components and reuse it throughout our application, saving time. And also this enable us to set a foundation for Compose multi-platform. With Compose multi-platform, whatever UI we have in Compose for our mobile app can be shared across various platforms such as iOS or web. And as such, we created a dedicated design system module so that we can plug and play the UI components. In future, if we add this module as a submodule in other existing mobile projects, our entire UI migration will become easier, and we can say that all the three Android apps are using this are consistent across the UI. So that is something that we have in mind, and we hope to implement that in future iterations. So now coming to multi-modular approach. Before this ESG SOC, we just have a single module which was responsible for pretty much everything. So in the current scenario of Android development, such is not the case. We need to have a multi-modular approach for many reasons. One of them being increasing our build time, improving our build time. So with this, if we have properly migrated our application into a multi-modular application, this enabled us to somewhat decrease our build time, which increases the efficiency of any developer. Moving on, there's a huge chance that our existing code base can develop into a huge complex code base. And in that particular scenario, this particular approach will be really useful. So we had 4 high-level modules that we named as build logic, core, feature, and Mifos. So core itself contains several modules ranging from network modules to analytics, among other such things. And now whatever screens we had in mobile wallet were put under feature modules. So you can have payment screen, you have receive payment, you have send payment, you have receive payment, and other such screens in this feature module. So in future, if we have to make any changes, we can just go to the submodule for that particular screen and make our changes, which again improves the code organization and also promotes reusability and maintainability of our code. Right. So while all of this migration was taking place, we had to clean up and refactor our code on several occasions. One such huge refactoring was using navigation Compost instead of our existing navigation that we had in place. And also, since we're migrating to Compost multi-platform, it was inevitable. We had to move to navigation Compost. Now, moving on, we removed feature packages in the first module and transformed them into respective modules. As mentioned earlier, right now we have a feature module in our app, but earlier it was just a package under the Mifos pay, so it wasn't really robust, and we had to and hence migrating it into its own module made more sense. And also when we moved to an entirely composed multi-platform scenario, having such modules will really help us in what we are trying to build. So moving on, retrofit to Cater. So retrofit was traditionally the network library that we were using in our Android native applications. Now retrofit in itself has no such problem. It works really well. But since we had to make our code base sustainable with cross-platform applications, moving to Ktor made much more sense. There were different libraries, but after discussion with my mentor, Ktor was the way to go. So we decided to replace our existing network libraries from retrofit to Ktor. So as such, most of almost half of our code base is in Ktor, and the remaining few services will be migrated to Ktor very soon. So there are some services that do not yield any response from backend. So those services are remaining, but main services such as login or such as authentication or savings transaction or other receive payments transaction, these services were migrated to Ktor as these were essential for our project. So this Ktor will help us to enable uh, development across multi-platforms. So Java to Kotlin, right? So this was a very basic thing to do, but again, it was very important because without Kotlin, we wouldn't have been able to move to Compost multi-platform. We wouldn't have been able to use Ktor. We wouldn't have been able to use a lot of things. So hence, we had to migrate our Java to Kotlin. So as such, in the present scenario, there is not even a single line of Java that we are using in our project, which is a huge plus. It is a huge bonus on our side. And this migration to Kotlin enable us to integrate Compost and subsequently will help us when we move towards an entire Compost multi-platform code base. So these are some of the screens of our project as of now in the current UI that we have. These are all working screens. You can check it out. Right, you can scan the QR, you can set an amount, you can request payment. So these are the bank accounts that we have as of now. Hopefully in the future we can add support for multiple bank accounts, but that's a thing for the future. And also an FAQ screen, which is very essential when you talk about any mobile wallet applications. So right, so what are the challenges faced and conquered that I conquered in this year's GSOC? So one of the most important thing as an Android developer or even as a software developer was why should I change the architecture layer of my app? So migration from MVP to MVVM was something that I had done in the past, but this year's GSOC allowed me to fully grasp the essence of why this migration was important. Why was it essential? Great. Now moving on, I understood how to migrate an application to Compose. In last year's GSOC, I had done a basic setup in Mifos mobile, but in this year's GSOC, I had to migrate the entire code base to Compose, which had some really complex screens with some complex data. So handling them taught me a lot. And I also got to work with Aditya on this project, and it allowed me to distribute work between the two of us and properly manage our time since since he had his exams and I was working as a full-time employee. And I also leveraged the open source community when I was researching about Compose multi-platform, since I had mentioned this in my earlier meetings that it is not something that has an existing fan base. I would say something under development, and as such, I had to contact a lot of people in this open source world to get my task done. And I also learned to micromanage this work with my personal life. So I had to take out time from my full-time job and work on this project which was very cumbersome at first, but then it became very easy down the line. Along the way, it became very easy. So right, what more can be done? So we were able to implement a basic setup of Compost platform, but again, there is a lot that needs to be done. And as such, we have to slowly and effectively move towards that implementation. We weren't able to write unit and UI testing in this year's GSOC. So we just had a few unit test classes, which I think isn't sufficient. We should moving forward, we need to write unit tests for those particular files or unit tests or UI testing for our entire mobile project. And also we have this latest UI that a friend of Rajan shared. We weren't able to work on that since we were more focused on migration and adding multi-platform support. So moving on, revamping the UI is something that we are eyeing, and hopefully in the next iteration we will be able to revamp the UI, if not earlier. So thank you. That's all from my side.